How's everybody doing? Welcome to the Jindo Radio. For the next 2 hours, you guys will be treated to some stuff that I have in store for you. If you don't know, I am the host of the Jindo YouTube channel. You can find my stuff at youtube.com/Jindo or bitshoot.com/Jindo if you're not into the whole YouTube thing. There's a lot of stuff that we gotta go over today. But first, let's just talk a little bit about some of the recent stuff that I worked on. I just recently uploaded an episode about the Green Sahara period. You guys can check that out on my channel. Really interesting stuff. The Green Sahara, if you don't know, prior to being a vast desert, almost uninhabitable desert. Not that long ago, it was actually an area rich in resources and water and all of that stuff, and home to pastoralists, agriculturalists, and hunter-gatherers alike. It was a really interesting time. So if you have some interest in that, you should totally check it out. I have but then there's some other stuff that I really want to go over, and a lot of it has to do with Amazonia, Guatemala, the Amazon basin. Obviously, if you don't know where Amazonia is, it's that greater area, the Brazilian plateau, and all of the very interesting, I wouldn't say new, but new as in within the past 15 years. There have been all these discoveries and such regarding the peopling there, two different migrations or two different groups of colonizers that came in. One came in purportedly during the Ice Age, right before the last glacial maximum, and the second, the more well-known colonizers, which are represented as the Clovis people, around right after the Younger Dryas period, or around the Younger Dryas period, and so we're gonna go deep into that, probably in the second hour or midway through the first hour. We're gonna go over some listener comments. That should be fun. There's a lot of interesting ways, or a lot of interesting things that people have said over. Gosh, I think my channel started in July of 2018, and since then I've had so many comments, so many interesting comments. Very little hate, surprisingly little hate. Although some of the hate that I've gotten is usually very few and far between, and they're usually a lot of religious fundamentalists or just trolls. Just I don't know why people just get mad about anything nowadays. But again, like the fundamentalists, they get mad because they think the Earth is a certain age. And the stuff that I usually talk about predates a lot of that stuff. And I've heard all kinds of arguments. I've sat through all kinds of conversations regarding the falsification or the pseudoscience or whatever, fill in the blank of the subject matter that I'm covering. But again, it could hardly be considered pseudoscience when there are actual scientists and research articles published in really reputable sources like Nature magazine, PLOS1, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and so on. There are a lot of resources and a lot of people who they do this for a living. They're constantly writing books and updating people on the research, and although a lot of it gets published, not a lot of it gets reported. So a lot of the stuff I cover in my channel are largely based on these articles and some subject matter. Other stuff that I cover that's not human or ancient human related or ancient human migration related. I like to talk a lot about history, especially hidden history and ghost populations and lost kingdoms or hidden kingdoms. One of which, hopefully, if I have time in the second hour, we'll talk about. Of course, I'm referring to Tartaria or Tartary. This is I've been looking into this rather recently, and it's just mind blowing, and how a lot of Tartaria's history was being obscured and hidden, and a lot of it does make sense though. The peasant revolt of Pugachev, and Pugachev was actually kind of like a scapegoat slash semi-created person. We'll get into that, and Pugachev's rebellion and all that stuff. And interestingly enough, Tartaria was their lands were not only in Siberia and the lands north of Mongolia, and even included Tibet, but also stretched into Alaska and the west coast of the United States. And that's really interesting. And then the whole alternative history of like the timeline was messed with a bunch of times. There's a lot of there's a really deep rabbit hole, and I don't think I'll have time to go over all of it. But the Tartaria thing, just the bare bones of it, is super interesting stuff. But I'd like to thank the Grimerica guys. Darren was really cool about. Actually, it was his idea to get me on this radio show, to get like a nice block throughout the week. So I just settled on Friday afternoons. It's convenient. I think a lot of people are hopefully listening. And again, if you want to participate in the discussion, you could leave a comment on one of the on either BitChute or the YouTube channel. You can send me a tweet at JustinJG_, or you can just send the tweet at the Jindo. Either one. If you have any questions or comments, concerns, whatever it is, you can totally just reach me. I'm pretty accessible. Another thing is, if you would like to hear me on other people's shows, or if you want me to interview somebody, I think the last person I interviewed was Bruce Fenton, author of Into Africa Theory. His book Into Africa. I would highly suggest checking out his stuff. His Twitter handle is ExogenesisHH, and he's got a wealth of information, and he's constantly active and constantly posting new articles and new discoveries as well. And he gives his take on the origins of people who, again, go back to 800. He thinks 800,000, 750,000 people. There was this, or 750,000 years ago, there was a divergence in human history, or the human genetics, basically. So a mass divergence. So Neanderthals were diverging, Denisovans were diverging, and then, of course, modern Homo sapiens diverged as well during that time. So he's under the impression that, and he's got a lot of evidence that he presents, and I would highly recommend just going through his work. But it's very interesting that he's always bringing up stuff that again supports this divergence about almost 1 million years ago. So so check out Bruce Fenton's stuff on Twitter, again at ExogenesisHH. Also, another thing, hit up the Grimerica Twitter as well if you haven't followed them already. I'm assuming that if you're listening to this, you do follow Grimerica. So definitely, if you haven't, go follow them. Those guys are awesome. They're if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be on the radio, of course, right now. Let's see. So where should we start? Let's talk about Amazonia, shall we? So when I appeared on Grimerica a few weeks ago, I talked a little bit about, actually a lot of bit about the lost city of, or the rumors surrounding the lost city of El Dorado, the city of gold. I talked about the conquistadors and the whole story of Pizarro, and his journey through the Amazon River, unwittingly traveling the length of the Amazon back in the 1500s, and his Carvajal's journal. Carvajal again being his basically his scribe that wrote everything down. He was like the black box of the expedition. So he just wrote everything down, and his account was just insane. He talked about how there's so many gold and silver idols, some in the form of women or other sculptures, vessels of gold and silver for the service of the sun. He talks about the massive population that was living there. He talks about the roads and how just the entire thing. I can't believe it's not a movie. The whole thing should just be a movie. And it would be way better than Lord of the Rings. It'd be way better than Willow, or what's the other one? Harry Potter. Like, it would be way better than any of that stuff, and it's all real. It's all real. So that would be awesome. To someone, please, if you go to USC, if you're in a production or a movie production or anything like that, please, I implore you, look into Carvajal's account of the first conquistadors going through the Amazon basin, and really look into all the details, because he leaves no stone unturned, considering his situation. I mean, they were on the brink of death for months and months and months. They had to raid people. They had to do unspeakable stuff to just survive. And they had no idea how long the river was. They had no idea where they were going. They were just in this foreign land. And I just can't believe their minds must have been so blown at not only the fact that there's all these achievements and just the huge population and the huge infrastructure that went into it. Their agricultural system was just exemplary. It could sustain populations of 250, 300, even 350,000 people. They could field an army of 60,000 people or greater that were made up of men aged 30 to 70. So they didn't even use young men. They didn't even use young men in their military. So again, what that speaks to not only their base population, but also speaks to their cultural customs. I mean, what kind of culture? How long does a culture have to develop in order to come to the conclusion? Yeah, we don't need to use young men. Our young men are better served at home. And then the men who've lived a little bit, starting from age 30, they could serve, and then they'd still have 60,000 plus people. I mean, that's huge. That's just to put that into context. The people who were living in London at the time in the 1500s, their population, their base population was just 60 to 70,000 people in that one city. So we'll go more into that, but I highly suggest you guys look into these purported Amazonian cities, and their population settlements and all that stuff. It's been largely the response to it in the coming centuries, or in the centuries after that, were equally interesting. It just makes no sense why they would smash this down, and it does make some sense, I guess, from their perspective. They don't want that type of information going out for whatever reason. But by the time that they were trying to squash the story, the population had already been decimated. Smallpox went through. I think there was a study, there was about 35 to 40 different epidemics that happened within a very short time of each other. So Carvajal's expedition, between Carvajal's expedition and then the 15 or 20 years later, there's I think the Teixeira expedition. Just in that time span, 90% or something like that of people were destroyed, either through smallpox or war and looting, but mainly smallpox is just what wiped them out. And again, you would expect that if you take one population of people who've diverged and had their own history for thousands and thousands of years, and then they meet this, I guess you could call them isolated population, although they were huge numbers. They weren't exposed for millennia to the same fauna and flora and diet and therefore gut biome, and then from gut biome your immune system's different and all that stuff. It was just so foreign to them that they didn't have any fail-safe immune system to combat the smallpox and all that stuff. So again, it's really interesting stuff, these reports from the Spanish and even Portuguese expeditions. So anyway, we're going to take a little break here. We're going to take like a 1-2 minute break, and I'll be back, and then we'll just jump into all the content. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Okay, so let's start with some of the resistance I was talking about regarding some of these crazy numbers, which we'll get into. And if you're wondering why, all the stuff that I mentioned in the last segment, the dates, there's 300,000 people, 60,000 soldiers at will, the capital of Tapajos, all of this stuff. Why wasn't this mentioned at all? Why was this suppressed? Who was behind it? So there are a lot of people, but there's one person in particular, if you want to get very recent. Back in the 80s and 90s, there was this person named Betty Meggers. If you're well versed in this, you probably are rolling your eyes right now. Betty Meggers, again, if you don't, just the long and short of it, she was basically one of these entrenched scientists who, for some reason that I won't get too deep into right here, she was an authority. She was an authority on anything South America, Amerindian, any of that stuff. She had the final say on anything that happened. So there was this other, the other scientist, Wilkinson. Wilkinson, he does this huge study on Amazonian civilization, and he gives conservative dates as well. He gives like the average city in Amazonia, like a population of 10 to 12,000 people. But if you look at the actual reports, the population way exceeds that by orders of magnitude. So let's talk about back in 1662, we have this guy, Mauricio de Ariarte. Okay, so he's talking about Tapajos, which is the city that could field, in his words, 60,000 warriors. Okay, so any such number of militia would, by comparative civilizational standards, have implied an urban population of 300,000 to 360,000 people. All right, so this is 1662. He's talking about, he's reporting a few decades after the fact. I think he's talking about Tapajos circa like 1500s. So, again, if you take this in the context. So, back to Betty Meggers, she didn't say anything. She was kind of radio silent on this. She didn't really she was radio silent, but she didn't concede anything. She didn't rethink her own stance or anything like that. And then in 1999, she wrote, in Amazonia, non-state societies appear to have organized large, dense populations, intensive subsistence adaptations, large systems of earthworks, production of elaborate artworks, and architecture for considerable periods of time. So again, she started to kind of beat around the bush, in a sense, right? She does concede that there are systems of earthworks. She starts to talk about like this artworks, which we'll get into probably in the next segment. Some of the rock art and stuff that was found there, and she even concedes architecture. But she does everything but call for a new dating or call for a reclassification of the people of Amazonia and the Brazilian plateau. She doesn't call for any of that stuff. Again, and she's supposed to be this huge looming figure in archaeology. She's supposed to have this huge sway, and people were like looking to her to confirm some of this stuff, but she didn't. She didn't. So we don't know. We don't know who. I don't know why. It seems to be counter to academia, counterproductive to finding the truth. And if you tell the average person, it does such a disservice to anybody who's looking in, especially in the age of the internet, when you can look stuff up and you can look up not just Wikipedia articles, not just nonsense articles from troll websites, but actual academic journals. You know, you can look that up now. It's open to the public. This is just stuff that's out there. Everything I talk about is just stuff that's out there. And still, you have somebody like Betty Meggers who has such sway, and like she can just endorse the fact because she did accept everything that Wilkinson was proposing, that Willerslev was proposing, that Skoglund was proposing, which we'll talk into Richard Skoglund and his genetic research and stuff like that, and then we'll go into like the the cranial research that went in, and that is just mind blowing as well. So let's just go back to this number. 300,000 to 360,000 people of an implied urban population of this people. So how is this possible? And I mentioned before, exemplary agronomy or agriculture. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, they had, if I've mentioned in previous episodes on my channel, and I think I talked about it with Darren and Graham. They did LiDAR scanning of the large parts of different parts of rainforests. I think they did it. They've done it in Peru. They've done it on the fringes of Amazonia, and they found a network grid of either places that had roads and homes and like residences and stuff like that, even palaces. And they also found terraced, again, this is all buried under jungle now. They found terraced farmland, essentially. So they were growing stuff on the terrace. You can kind of see this now in like Machu Picchu and that area of Peru. They had a very similar thing going on in terms of growing food. And supporting a huge and well in abundance of 300,000 people. They were able to do that. Sorry, little technical issue there came up. Yeah, so they had all this infrastructure in place. They had it all in place to sustain this huge population. So that had to. How long was that in place? Well, that the jury's still out on there, but just do some quick math. How long does it take to get to a 300,000 population? Let's say you start out with a group of 1,000 people. No, let's say 10,000 people. Okay, and then you have enough food, you have enough abundance, and you have enough stability in terms of political, religious. Oh, and by the way, all these people spoke one language as well. So again, how do you get to that point of excellence in terms of a civilization? Probably there are growing pains for sure. Maybe there was a civil war. Maybe there were different genocides that happened. We don't really know. We don't really have evidence of that. But let's just give them the benefit of the doubt for the sake of of example here, just for the sake of argument. That it's still, if everything goes right, no civil war, no religious uprising, everybody's on the same page, it still takes a while. That takes a few generations at least to get to that point. And then they were all answering to one guy. I don't remember his name. Starts with the M. It's not Montezuma. Montezuma was Mexico. I forget his name. But they were all under this guy's sovereign. So we don't know if this guy was part of a dynasty, if they had elections. All that stuff would be really interesting to figure out. But anyway, I think I'm burying the lead here. So, and it all boils down to this question, right? Again, if there were Amazonian cities, where did they go? And if there were Amazonian cities, how could they have subsisted? We already talked about the subsistence thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I mean, it gets even deeper. I mean, there's terra prieta, which is, again, this man-made type of soil that they had to create in order to grow anything there, because all that soil in the jungle is it's not good to grow stuff. It gets depleted in nutrients within a few cycles of growing things. It's not like they had to have known how hard it was to grow stuff. So that's why they created this man-made soil. Again, this terra preta, I think. And you guys can just do a Google. If you guys are behind a computer, you can just Google search that now, just so I don't confuse the hell out of you. But basically, it was the soil that they could use and reuse and reuse, and it was almost like a super renewable source of nutrients for what they're growing. So, if you just look at the biodiversity of the Amazon now, all the overgrowth now, and we'll get into some of the numbers probably in the next segment here. Regarding the square footage and the comparative square footage, it's insane. It's insane. And if you look at the biodiversity of the jungle, I mean, they're constantly finding new species. They haven't discovered everything in the Amazon, not even close. Not only that, if you think about ayahuasca and what you need to do to create ayahuasca, you take a random leaf and a random root or whatever. You take two components and you mix it together. Out of how many species of plants are in the jungle? Countless. And somehow these people they found out how to do that. Either it was passed on within their culture. And again, if all this is true, this culture goes back way into the annals of history. And I'm talking about prehistory, essentially. Back, again, before the LGM, the last glacial maximum being around 20,000 years ago, so about 18,000, 19,000 BC. And part of the problem with spitting out all these dates, just as an aside here, is the fact that the dates are so long ago that it's really hard to wrap your head around the gravity of it. So just to put it in perspective, I always use the Younger Dryas boundary as a measuring stick here. The Younger Dryas boundary is about 12,800 years ago. And 12,800 years ago, shit hit the fan, and we basically moved from the Pleistocene, which was the previous epoch, to our current epoch, which is the Holocene. And we've been in the Holocene ever since. So this is well before the Younger Dryas boundary. This is well before the geography shifts, the climate shifts. So, and these people were using, they were living on the land here. And this is supposed to be what mainstream is. They don't even go into the BC. I think it's like at the earliest is like 280, 380. Although they have found like tobacco pipes and marijuana pipes with residue in the pipes actually on the west coast of California, the west coast of the United States, and some parts of in Peru and Colombia and such. They found people were smoking stuff about, and they dated that to like 200 BC. So again, these are really, really young dates. And it's weird that you have these really young dates and then you have these super impossibly old dates going back. I mean, I'm talking 30,000 years ago, guys, 36,000 years ago. The only other place, again, that has these types of dates for modern humans is Australia. And so Australia, I did another episode, I think about a week ago, about how the origins of the Gundit Mara people of Southwest Victoria, Australia, and they one of their oldest, I think their oldest oral history talks about this volcano erupting, and then they traced the volcano to about 40,000 years ago. And then another thing in Australia is the oldest stone monument, which goes back 55,000 BC. So again, we're talking about old people here, old and unbroken settlement, continuous settlement of Australia. So those people, their genetic marker, we're going to call them the Australo-Melanesians. Their marker was found in these people of Amazonia. Okay. And then that's the genetic marker that they found in them. And not only that, they've also found their cranium is identical to modern day Australo-Melanesians. So we have this weird cranial morphology of the ancient Brazilian skulls when compared to other Amerindians. Okay, the more traditional Amerindians, their skulls are more resemble East Asians. Okay, so now we have this overlapping genetic and cranial evidence that again, these Australo-Melanesians were probably the first colonizers, the more ancient colonizers, and then later on you had the Clovis, Amerindian, East Asian people coming through the Beringia land bridge. That right now is the most cutting edge hypothesis. There are still people out there who cling to they still cling to what do you call the Clovis first model, which I think is pretty safe to say that it's been thoroughly debunked just because of Monteverde site and all of these other things. So we're going to take a quick break, and then when I come back, we're going to talk more about the genetic evidence, the Skoglund population Y thing, the Neves and Hobbs skulls from Lagoa Santo in Brazil. All of this stuff we will talk about when we come back. All right, we are back. Let's talk a little bit about why Clovis isn't first. Just really quick, I feel like I kind of buried the lead there in the last segment. Oh, by the way, if you guys are just tuning in, please go over to youtube.com/thejindo or bitshoot.com/thejindo to follow my main channel. I get a lot of people who I always never mention the donation stuff. I always forget. There's a link on my BitChute, on any of my BitChute videos. If you feel like you want to support, that'd be awesome. There's a button, a $ button on the bottom of each video on BitChute. You can just click and you can donate through either coin payments or PayPal. If you want to do that's cool. It's not necessary or anything like that. Again, I don't pay anybody to run this. I do everything myself. I'm the producer. I'm the host. I plan everything. So and I carry everything out, and I do all the sound engineering and stuff. I'm not by trade anyway. I'm not a sound engineer at all. So I learn everything on the fly. So basically, what I'm trying to get at is the overhead for the show is very low. I bought all my equipment. I bought out of my own pocket just because, it's a labor of love. I like doing this stuff. It's fun. And I really do enjoy the interaction with some of the commenters and some of the people who really do enjoy the content, and whether they're at work. Mainly it's people at work. People at work are just, they're looking for content. They want to listen while they're working because it makes the time go by. Some of the people I've talked to have ranged from just regular office workers to teachers to landscapers to even truck drivers. The truck driver one's a big one for sure. One of my close friends is a truck driver, and he tells me like he goes through audiobooks, like many of them throughout the week, just from being on the road all day. So again, it's cool to help those people. It's cool to be able to entertain you guys because you guys are really hanging on every word, it seems. So to me, it's just an honor and a pleasure to help you guys through your workday for sure. Speaking of which, I should get an iTunes. I keep talking about getting on iTunes and just uploading my stuff on iTunes. But if you have YouTube Red, like the app, you can minimize and listen, very similar to the podcast app and stuff. The downside, of course, is you don't get the visuals from my YouTube channel. I usually have maps or some text from the research articles and other stuff on there. And of course, the interviews you probably won't miss out too much on because it's just an A and B conversation. So that's fine, just audio only. But as far as the rest of my channel goes, if you're new, if you're just tuning in, a lot of it is visual. So anyway, let's talk about Clovis first, and let's talk about the main smoking gun that destroys Clovis first, and that would be the Monte Verde archaeological site in Chile. Okay, now this isn't Amazon basin, and we are going to get back to the Amazon basin, but I think it's really important to get this out of the way. So let's talk about Monte Verde. So Monte Verde essentially has been excavated multiple times. I think it was first excavated in like the 1970s, and then they had this initial date, 14,500 years ago. So 14,500 years ago, they found tools in the strata that they were digging. They found old fireplaces. All this stuff that they were finding, and there was a huge debate going on of the date of these artifacts, these tools that were pointing that Monte Verde increasingly had nothing to do with Clovis whatsoever. So the first argument that happened once they found Monte Verde was whether or not these were Clovis artifacts. Now, if you want to look at Clovis artifacts, they're fluted points. So you guys can just look that up. I don't have a visual for you, obviously, but just know that the Clovis tools had a distinct look to them, and they called them fluted points. So Monte Verde, the artifacts and their tools did not look like this. So the logical conclusion, therefore, was, okay, this is a different culture. This is a different people. That was the crux of the argument, right? But again, there were people who thought these were the ancestors of the settlers that must have crossed the Bering Land Bridge. They must have gone all the way down to Chile without mixing with anybody, just straight down there in the short amount of time. And it just seemed like a really hard sell. So then they continued more excavations at Monte Verde. They dug deeper, and then guess what? They found older occupation levels. They started exposing these. These yielded increasingly more ancient dates. So in 2015, Tom Dillehay, who was, he's the guy in charge of all of this. You guys have probably heard his name. He revised the age from 14,500 BC or BP to 18,500 years ago. And again, these are conservative estimates. These are largely conservative estimates because it goes deeper. And then another detail that he found in 2015, aside from this revised age, was that it was reoccupied several times over a period of more than 4,000 years. So this is what Dillehay says in his article here. This is a quote. This is a direct quote. The new evidence is multiple, spatially discontinuous, low density occurrences of stratigraphic in situ stone artifact. In situ means basically they were found as it is, like at it when they uncovered it, so it wasn't moved. Faunal remains and burned areas that suggested discrete horizons of ephemeral human activity, radiocarbon dated between 14,500 to 19,000 calibrated BP. So that's right after the last glacial maximum. So excuse me. This rocked the archaeological world, the scientific community, and then there was another area of this site. By the way, Monteverde, there's Monteverde 1 and Monteverde 2. These are different sites. So Monteverde 1 was an area of the site. He found that was even older than 19,000 years ago. So he thought it was 30,000 years. So again, the deeper they go, the further back this goes. This is the obvious pattern here. So MV1 dated to 33,000 BP, MV1 being Monteverde 1. So he comes to this, again, this is Dillehay. This is what he says. Initially defined by scattered occurrences of 3 clay-lined, possible culturally produced burned areas and 26 stones, at least 6 of which suggest modification by humans. Again, these were dated 33,000 years before present. This evidence from MV1 was too meager and too laterally discontinuous to falsify or verify its archaeological validity. So that last part is just him being very conservative. Basically, he just means that he did find a few instances where these burned areas did date to 33,000 years BP, but there wasn't enough for him to comfortably publish it in an article and put his reputation on the line, essentially, which is normal. That's completely normal for someone who's an academic. Because again, Dillehay is an academic. He's respected. As far as academics go, he's on the cutting edge. But in terms of others, he's part of that academic squad, that community, so to speak. So again, he's among a group of very adamant Clovis firsters. And he, in 1997, he had many debates, and he had eventually the 1997 is basically the turning point of when some other academics started to come out in support of his work. So the ball was definitely rolling as early as the late 90s, but still, there's a lot of heel digging and stuff. So then it goes even further, okay? So Dillehay and his team, in 2015 again, they do this re-examination of Monteverde, and then again they dig deeper and they get to a date of 43,500 years ago. Okay, so again, remains associated with artifacts unearthed at the time. But Dillehay, again, he thinks it's too meager and inconclusive to determine whether they represent human activity or indeterminate natural features. So he goes on, at present, the latter case is perhaps more feasible given there is presently no convincing archaeological or other data to substantiate a human presence in South America prior to 20,000 years ago. So 20,000 years ago is the line he draws, okay? So just to recap, he starts at 14,500 years ago. He digs deeper. He gets to 18,500 years ago. And then he digs even deeper and he gets to 33,000 years ago and 43,500 years ago. The two latter dates of which he will mention, but he won't say for certain one way or another. So he says it's inconclusive. So I guess for Dillehay, he wants to see more of these dates pop up. Right now, in terms of where he's coming from, they're just too few and far between, which is fine. 20,000 years ago, that line that he's willing to stick his reputation out on for 20,000 years ago is still a long time, and that's a huge progress compared to back in the early 90s and mid 90s. And even in the early 2000s, there are people still hanging their hat on Clovis first. So that's a huge leap, but it's not enough, right? It's not enough. I mentioned in the last segment the Australo-Melanesians and their constant, continual inhabitants being there for 55,000 plus years. Guys, that is a long time. Okay, I mentioned again that some of these dates just go over people's heads. It's too mind-boggling. It's just too much. But people were living in Australia and the surrounding, like New Guinea, New Zealand, right? People were living there for 55,000 years uninterrupted. So one of the hallmarks of that, one of the byproducts of that, is a rich and deep oral history. And I mentioned that last time, the genesis story of the Gundit Mara people in southwest Victoria, these volcanoes. And I know I mentioned this 3 times already, but I can't stress enough that these oral histories are no joke, guys. Try to play a game of telephone for a year and see what happens. Now expand that to 40,000 years. 40,000 years of a game of telephone, and it's still pristine. It still resonates scientifically today. That is intense, guys. That is intense. So, anyway, so let's talk about the cranial morphology of the ancient Brazilian people, the ancient Brazilian skulls. Again, all these skulls were found on the Brazilian plateau. So there's a geographical component to this. They're all from the same area. And let's see how it compares to the Australo-Melanesians. Okay. So let me pull up the research article here. So Manasa Raghavan and Esk Willerslev, okay, these two from the University of Copenhagen, the geogenetics within the Center for Geogenetics. Okay, so they put this hypothesis to the test. This cross-cranial examination of Native American skulls, Australo-Melanesian skulls, and comparing their morphologies with others. Okay, so they find out that long and short of it, the Amerindian population resembled East Asians, and then these people later on, these Native Americans from Amazonia and the Central Brazilian Plateau. It was still out. The jury was still out, essentially. So they were inconclusive when it came to the Central Brazilian Plateau. So after that, Pontus Skoglund and David Reich, again from Harvard Medical School, the Department of Genetics, they want to test out this hypothetical population Y. And this population Y I've talked about before is essentially this proposed population from Australia/Melanesia that somehow made their way to Amazonia in the remote past. Okay, so they wanted to once and for all come to any conclusions about population Y and how they likely contributed to the DNA of Native Americans from Amazonia and the Central Brazilian Plateau. Okay, so here's what they said. This discovery is striking in light of interpretations of the morphology of some early Native American skeletons, which some authors have suggested that have affinities to Australasian groups. The largest number of skeletons that have been described as having this craniofacial morphology and that date to younger than 10,000 years old have been found in Brazil, the home of Asurui, Caritiana, and Javanche groups, who show the strongest affinity to Australasians in genetic data. So what has never been substantially in dispute is that the craniometric similarities between ancient populations from the Brazilian Amazon and Australo-Melanesian populations are real and quantifiable. Okay? So this coincides with the genetic data that suggests that these similarities are not evidence of relatedness but must be coincidental. Right? Is it let's see. So Skoglund, they come to a conclusion. Okay, it could be one of two things, right? So one hypothesis could be a local microevolutionary process that transformed the Paleo-American morphology into that prevailing today among Native Americans. Okay, so that's one hypothesis, which is pretty hard. How could they have this microevolutionary process happen in such a short amount of time? If this were true, their craniums must have morphed within a span of like 8,000 years or something small like that, which is, of course, that's not possible, right? That stuff like that doesn't happen that quickly. So the second hypothesis is that the Americas were successfully occupied by two morphologically differentiated human stocks, with the Paleo-American morphology entering first. The Paleo-American morphology being the Australo-Melanesian population Y. So this second one is a lot more plausible, according to Skoglund and his colleagues, for three reasons. So the first reason this hypothesis is more plausible, that the population Y came in first, well before Clovis first. Again, it would be very unlikely that the same evolutionary event happened in the Americas and in East Asia in parallel at approximately the same time. In other words, that it's very hard to imagine that these evolutionary events would happen. Again, off the top of my head, the only way that makes sense is if you invoke some sort of extraterrestrial genetic manipulation at that time, which again, there's no evidence for that. There is absolutely no evidence for that happening. The second reason Skoglund mentions is because in South America, the transition between the two morphological patterns was, as far as we know, abrupt. Okay? So, according to the record, it just seemed, the fossil record and the stuff they found, it would just be too abrupt for these morphological patterns to have developed simultaneously but independently. So that it just doesn't make any sense. And third, and this is a big one, cranial morphology has recently been shown to respond adaptively only to extreme environmental conditions, being therefore much less plastic than originally thought. So again, they summarize elsewhere in their paper, their results support the hypothesis that two distinct biological populations could have colonized the New World in the Pleistocene-Holocene transition. And that makes the most sense, right? I think that's the most parsimonious explanation here, is because this conclusion is arrived at from two different types of data, from craniometric data, which is just a fancy way of saying studying the Braincase, and the genetic data of Skoglund and Reich. Again, so the fact that there's genetic evidence for two founding populations of the Americas, again, this population Y from Australo-Melanesia, and then this these other populations, the Clovis first, and these East Asian, Siberian populations as well. So let's take a quick break. We're at the top of the second hour now. So when we come back, we're going to go back to Amazonia, and I'm going to blow your mind with some more square footage talk, some other rock shelter sites, some other stuff in Amazonia, and how it compares to like Guatemala and some of these other sites. And then after that, at the bottom of the second hour, we'll probably do some listener comments and then go through my news desk, which I have a ton of articles that I sift through every day. And a lot of them, I would say 85% of them make their way to my channel. So we'll go through a few of those as well. And again, please share some of these links. Please share the radio link, or you can embed it and post it on a forum or something, and all that stuff. So please spread the word. Send me some articles on Twitter as well, and leave some comments. And I'll be back after this break. Hey everybody, I am back. Thank you for joining me for the second hour of the Jindo Radio. If you're just tuning in, thank you for tuning in. If you've been hanging out, oh my goodness, sorry, I'm still figuring stuff out here, guys. It's my first day. Give me a break. If you're just joining me for the second hour, please follow my YouTube channel on youtube.com/thejindo, bitshoot.com/thejindo, on Twitter, twitter.com/thejindo, or for my Twitter, that's the Jindo official Twitter, but for my Twitter, twitter.com/justinjg_. That's where you'll find a lot of the stuff that I retweet and I interact with some of the people that are following my channel and stuff. So if you're just joining us, we just got done talking about the Amazon forest, the scope of how underexplored it is, which is what this hour is going to delve deeper into. We talked about Betty Meggers, the giant human cock block for anything Amazonian and South American and redating and all that stuff. Anything not basically anything anti-truth regarding Clovis First and the Australo-Melanesian signal. We talked about ancient cities that could field 60,000 soldiers and have these huge populations. We talked about their crazy developed agriculture that they had, the very advanced agriculture. We talked about the smallpox outbreak and the ensuing cultural memory banks being wiped clean. We talked about we just got done talking about the end of the first hour, the weird cranial morphology of ancient Brazilian skulls. We talked about the present day Amerindians resembling East Asians, and the people of Amazonia and the central Brazilian plateau being more resembling more of this Australo-Melanesian cranium, which I forgot to mention. Speaking of craniums, if you guys open up Google Earth or something and you guys look at Indonesia, specifically in Java, they have found Homo erectus skulls there that are surprisingly recent date. So Homo erectus is thought to have come out and evolved, I guess. The earliest signs of Homo erectus date to about 2.2 million years ago. But these Homo erectus skulls that were found in Java were dated to very recently comparatively, which is about 115,000 years ago. So not only were there Homo erectus living in present-day Indonesia, and again, at the time it was called Sundaland, which was a supercontinent, they also had very distinct skulls different from other Homo erectus found in Africa and such. So the difference was that their Braincase, they were significantly bigger. They were like 15-20% bigger cranial capacity. So then the obvious question was, well, are these erectus, or are these some sort of branched off version of erectus? And again, those are all valid questions because they found tools nearby nearby the location that they found these craniums within the same strata as these Homo erectus fossils, or craniums rather. So again, I just thought that was an interesting aside since we're on the subject of brain cases. Again, if you're just joining us, we talked about that. We talked about these three. If you guys take anything away from this hour, you should take away these three names of these indigenous, or these groups of these tribes essentially in Brazil. Again, the Surui, Surui, the Caritiana, and the Zavanch groups. Okay, those three groups have the strongest Australo-Melanesian signal, and therefore probably some of the more older groups of the indigenous people of South America. Okay, we talked about the Richard Skoglund genetic study and cross-examined it with the Neves-Hobb study, or Hube study of 2005 regarding the 81 skulls in Brazil, which were cross-examined with global data sets. And basically they said that the earliest South Americans much more similar to present Australians, Melanesians, and Sub-Saharan Africans, which again coincides with the genetic data of Skoglund. And so now that we have all that out of the way, that we have this connection, this obvious connection with the Australo-Melanesians and these South Americans, okay? Let's talk about why, or just the scope of what's not discovered. Because everything I've talked about, everything that people have written, even going back to the 70s and 60s, all the excavations that happened there, all the data that we found, it still does not even scratch the surface of what could be out there. Okay. And I'm just talking about by virtue of geography and the size of the Amazon basin. Okay. So far we've talked about Monteverde. There are two other sites I briefly mentioned, the Santa Elena and Pedra Ferrada sites in the that aren't in the Amazon basin but are outside the Amazon basin, within the same continent. And again, the Monteverde, already mentioned, goes back 33,000 to 42,500 years ago. Santa Elena and Pedra Ferrada had rock art that went back around the same time, 32,000 years. But let's talk about stuff actually in the Amazon basin, okay? So, just going forward, very little archaeology has been done in the Amazon basin at all. And the tiny fraction that has been done has focused on only the Ice Age occupation levels, okay? So this brings us to the study of the Pedra Pintada site, which is, again, another beautifully painted rock shelter, but this time in Brazil. And it's located right at the heart of the Amazon basin. Okay, it's at the confluence, and you guys can bring this up since this is radio. If this is my channel, I'd have all this stuff readily available on the screen for you to look at. But if you just look at Pedra Pintada, and you can see that it's located at the confluence of the Tapajos and Amazon rivers. Okay, think of the Fertile Crescent. Think of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. Think of the entire civilization that spread from there. Think about the Nile Valley. Think about the Nile River. Again, the spread of agriculture, the spread of civilization there. If you look at my the very recent Green Sahara video that I did, you find the same thing: rock shelters next to sources of water. So you guys see a pattern for it. The Danube River, right? Same thing. We have. People are attracted to river systems, fresh water and shelter and nice weather, okay? And coastlines. Okay, that much is known, okay? Pedra Pintada is one such site, okay? The only difference is that it's been shrouded and covered up by vast amounts of rainforest, okay? How vast? Well, let's see. The Amazon basin, the size of the Amazon basin, get your calculators out. 7 million square kilometers is the Amazon basin, okay? Of which 3.5 million kilometers squared is jungle, okay? So that right away is bigger than a lot of places, all right? So just for comparison's sake, look at the subcontinent of India, 3.29 million kilometers squared, okay? That's it. Australia is a little bit bigger than the Amazon basin, 7.7 million square kilometers. China, okay, we're getting bigger here, 9.59 million square kilometers. Canada, 9.98 million square kilometers. The United States, 9.63 million square kilometers. Europe, 10.18 million square kilometers, okay? That's a lot of land in the Amazon basin that has not been explored. But add into the fact that there's dense rainforest and there's all kinds of tribes still living there, all kinds of biodiversity still there that we haven't even scratched the surface on, then you can see that the stuff that we know now, now granted the LiDAR stuff is huge breakthroughs, huge advancements, in technology, and that's going to help us really get to the bottom of the history here. But as it stands now, in terms of academic work done, very, very little has been done. So I can't stress that enough, okay? Let's look at Guatemala now. Guatemala is a fraction of the size of the Amazon basin. Hell, let's just add up everything. Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, all that is just about 2 million square kilometers, okay? That's pretty small considering how big the Amazon basin is. And in Guatemala alone, it's not even, it's about like 350,000 square kilometers or something crazy small like that. They found so much stuff in Guatemala in that small a geographic area. They found so much stuff regarding the Mayans and the Mayan civilization. Just think about all the stuff we know about the Mayans and their calendar, their religion, their cultural practices, all the stuff that that scientists and archaeologists and geneticists, anthropologists, all of them, geographers, all the data that they found just extracted from those small sites in Guatemala. Imagine if we were to, or researchers were to pick up their stuff and go into the Amazon and just try to excavate there, see what they would bring up. I mean, LiDAR has already revealed roads and mega cities and all that stuff. Even the LiDAR in Guatemala. Hell, even the Nazca lines. I've been meaning to do an episode on the Nazca lines, but they found even more of these glyphs that you can see only from an aerial view, and they found way more. They found like tarantulas and spider or other types of spiders, monkeys, all these different types of animals that have essentially been planned and carved in, not carved, but like created on the surface of Earth, and you can't make out what it is unless you have like a satellite view or you have an airplane of some sort. So again, go figure. What's that all about? Anyway, my point is that there's so much stuff that's unexplored. So anyway, let's go look at Pedra Pintada. Okay, sorry, I braided the lead here. So this is a painted rock shelter in Brazil, located at the heart of the Amazon River. So Roosevelt, again, she's the lead archaeologist here. She excavated multiple occupation layers spanning the Holocene, the late Pleistocene, and the oldest and deepest turning out possibly to be as old as 16,000 years old. Okay, that's thermoluminescence dating right there. Okay, here's her conclusion. This is verbatim. This is what she said. The human presence in Caverna de Pedra Pintada during the late Pleistocene is established by numerous artifacts. The dated materials are associated in stratigraphic context, again, the layer that they found it in, at the beginning of a long cultural sequence. There is no pre-human biological material that could have mixed with the cultural remains, which are stratigraphically separated from later Holocene assemblages by a culturally sterile layer. So basically what she means there is all the stuff she found is completely isolated from the stuff in the later Holocene. Okay? So what that means is there's layer X, right? The more ancient layer. And then there's empty layer Y, and then there's the most recent Holocene era layer Z. Okay, so there's a whole layer with nothing in it that's separating these two. That's what that means. Okay, that's what she means by stratigraphically separated. The discovery, again, this is her talking. The discovery of Paleo-Indians along the Amazon confirms earlier evidence that the Paleo-Indian radiation, basically means the Paleo-Indian spread of people, was more complex than current theories provided for. Okay? So, 5.5, again, with that in mind, 5.5 million square kilometers of the Amazon basin is still covered by rainforest. That's bigger than Central America. That's bigger than India. That's almost as big as Australia. Okay? This is huge, guys. There's a lot of work to be done here. And again, there's no consensus on anything when it comes to Amazonia, okay? So let's just talk about some of the roadblocks here. Okay. Let's talk about why not a lot of work has been done. Okay. Then we'll end this segment and then we'll go on to the next segment. So where do I even start? Okay. So anything entirely covered by dense rainforest, okay, is very difficult and expensive to access. That's number one. Okay. If you're an ambitious archaeologist and you want to start digging for stuff, and you want to you have to develop resources and money, and you need a reason, an academic reason to go in there to justify all the resources that go into investigating. Okay, not that everything that I mentioned is reason enough. Obviously, it is, but in terms of the people who have the money and the people who allocate funding, you've got to sell it to them. Okay, and it's a tough sell already from the get-go, right? To explore dense rainforest. Okay. There's no inducement for archaeologists to invest scarce time and money on excavations in the Amazon, while it was believed that nothing of great interest would be found there. Okay, so then you have this second roadblock, okay? This bias, this Clovis first bias. Like, well, that doesn't make sense. We already know that the first people already lived there not too long ago, 10,000, 11,000, 12,000 years ago. So there's no reason to really go in there, and it'll just save us a headache. That's the second layer, okay? But again, how do we justify going in with these huge swaths of the Amazon encompassing millions of square kilometers, et cetera, et cetera? And then we think about other stuff, okay? Let's think about marine archaeological investigation. Same thing with marine life, okay? Same thing with marine archaeology. Most of marine archaeology is just finding like gold bullion on old Spanish and French sunken ships. That's most marine archaeology. When you think about the 27 million square kilometers of land that was submerged since the last ice age, again, that's a tough sell. That's a tough sell because there's a huge barrier to entry in terms of finance. And then that second layer of academia saying it's just not worth looking into. There's most likely nothing there. We should just focus on these shipwrecks. That's essentially what's going on here. Let's look at Antarctica. Okay, another parallel. 14 million square kilometers. Never ever investigated by an archaeologist. Okay. I know that there have been people reporting that there's a lost civilization in Antarctica. And that the Germans found something back in the 40s, in the 30s, and the 20s. But honestly, no further investigation was done at the time. So, and then let's go to the Sahara Desert. Again, I just did an episode on the Sahara. All we know is that it was green at some point for a while. And then it suffered desertification, and then it became what it is today. But again, the Sahara Desert, 9 million square kilometers, very different climate during the Ice Age, and the early parts of the Holocene as well. And again, same reason, it just gets brushed off to the side. Archaeologists don't think it's worth looking at. So guys, what I'm getting at here, and then we're going to go to break, because my throat's killing me and I got to get more coffee, is there's a lot of stuff that has not been discovered. There's a lot of stuff out there that's a giant fucking question mark, okay? So anybody saying that all the work's been done and now it's just a matter of interpretation is full of shit, okay? They're absolutely full of fucking shit. And I'm pretty passionate about this because a lot of people just sit on their ass and then they just rest on their laurels, and it just slows down truth. We only live on average 72 years, guys. Why in the hell do we have to wait for these entrenched archaeologists who are basing their viewpoint on old data, old dogma, and this just ridiculous resistance and closed-mindedness of what happened at these largely unexplored sites? Well, the reason for that is nonsensical. Okay, so why do we have to wait for someone to die before we can really start criticizing their idea? This academic consensus is bullshit. Okay, especially when it comes to Amazon. All right, I can't stress that enough. All right, and I'm sure if you guys are listening, you guys already know what I'm talking about. If you are the type of person to listen to this, then you're already well aware of all the issues here. So again, Graham Hancock likes to always say we are a species with amnesia. That is so true. Okay, so why in the hell would you take academia's take for as religious dogma? Now, academia has been right about a lot of things for sure, but when it comes to this type of quote fringy stuff, it's very easy to attack new opinions as pseudo archaeology, pseudo science, pseudo whatever. Right? That's all nonsense, guys. That it's all bullshit. So please, if you guys read, have an open mind and really consider the situation here. I've been trying. I know I've been rambling. I've been fucking rambling for an hour and a half now, for the better part of an hour and a half. But I'm just trying to place the context in which all this is going on, because I can tell this to somebody who's never read a word of anything, is a complete blank slate, and they would be confused as hell as to what I'm saying. So again, providing context is huge, and it's a huge reason why I started my channel in the first place, is because a lot of this context is either not known about, glossed over, or just hidden. Okay, so and that's what Graham Hancock and Randall Carr, all these guys, Willerslev, Skoglund, all of these guys, okay, that's what they're just trying to do. Okay, they're trying to build some actual scientifically backed stuff and present it to not only academia. They don't need academia's blessing, by the way. That those days are over for sure. Within the next few decades or so, it's just going to be who has the best data and the best technology and the most parsimonious explanations of this stuff. And it'll be up to the listeners to really decide what makes sense to them, without any outside influences of people just using ad hominems and all of these logical fallacies to justify their archaic positions. Okay, just because they want to, they either don't want to be wrong. And Egyptology is a big one. Egyptology is a huge culprit in terms of dating the pyramids and the Sphinx and stuff. They've been saying the same fucking shit for 80 years and they haven't budged on anything. So are you going to take their word for it, or are you going to take this cutting edge, these guys who don't really have that much skin in the game except to get to the truth? And that's who you want to follow, folks. People who just want to get to the truth and have no stake, no economic stake, or whatever it is, right? People who are willing to put their reputation on the line. And the late John Anthony West, rest in peace, Mr. West. You were one of the best Egyptologists. He's probably the single. If you want to name one guy with the most unadulterated truth about Egypt, check out the Magical Egypt series from John Anthony West. Great man, great individual. The dude knew what was up, and he knew what he wanted to do. He knew exactly what not only what the truth was, he wanted to present it in the best way possible to circumvent Zahi Hawass and all these fucking Egyptologists who aren't worth a fucking shit in my eyes. Anyway, so I'm getting fired up, guys. This coffee's really kicking in. But before we go on to the bottom of the hour, okay, and before I get to the news desk and some of the listener comments, I just want to finish off this. So huge areas of the planet that we know for sure were used by and lived upon by our ancestors. This is the state of things right now. The submerged continental shelves, the Sahara Desert, the Amazon rainforest, the frozen continent of Antarctica, who some people think is an ice wall. Again, we won't get into flat Earth. I'm not a flat earther or anything like that. But have, for a variety of practical and ideological reasons, have been badly served by archaeology, obviously, right? I just talked about that. The tiny patches that have thus far been surveyed and excavated within them are no legitimate basis upon which to draw conclusions and express certainties about the vast areas that remain unsurveyed and unexcavated, okay? I talked about Guatemala. It's only 109,000 square kilometers, okay? But within those 109 square kilometers, there's a bunch of shit that we found, guys. There's a lot of stuff that we found. Now, can you imagine if we took that and we surveyed we just did a LiDAR scan and picked out all the best areas to excavate, and if we just started there, that could be like a 4 or 5 year plan, and then within half a decade we would have all these new conclusions. And then Carvajal's journal, Teixeira's expedition, Pizarro, and all these conquistadors who were writing this shit down a long time ago, who got buried by academia like 250 years later. All these guys become exonerated. Do you know how fucking crazy that is, guys? Do you know how crazy that is? It's insane, and it's at our fingertips, guys. Within our lifetime, we can have a entirely confirmed new paradigm. Okay, this is huge. All right. So here's just a few of the things that they found just within Guatemala. Okay, just within 2,100 square kilometers of this forested region in northern Guatemala. Okay, here's what they found. 60,000 previously unsuspected ancient houses, palaces, defensive walls, fortresses, other structures as well as quarries, elevated highways connecting urban centers, complex irrigation and terracing systems capable of supporting intensive agriculture, okay? This is just in Guatemala, guys. All right, now let's go back to in the previous hour what I talked about in terms of the report by Mauricio de Heriarte. 1662, he says Tapajos could field 60,000 soldiers, no problem, between the ages of 30 and 70, okay? This implies a population of 300 to 360,000. Okay, this is Amazonia. So if we find this stuff in Guatemala, these terraced systems and complex irrigation systems supporting intensive agriculture, well, what does intensive agriculture usually lead to, guys? It leads to more people. Okay, we're talking about cities of 300,000 to 360,000. That's insane. Okay, the scale and population density has been grossly underestimated. Okay, especially in light of these LiDAR images. Scattered city-states, right? That was what previous scholars thought. They were just scattered city-states. They're no more than 5,000 people. But let's just end this segment with a quote, okay, from Catherine Reese Taylor, University of Calgary, archaeologist. Here's what she says. After decades of combing through the forests, no archaeologist had stumbled across these sites. More importantly, we never had the big picture that this data gives us. It really pulls back the veil and helps us see the civilization as the ancient Mayas saw it. Okay? Again, they use the latest scanning technologies. And then they could follow up with site surveys and excavations. That's all we got to do, guys. We have the technology. It's there for us. This implies a civilization capable of great oceanic voyages. Therefore, by definition, at a much more advanced stage of development than archaeologists are prepared to accept. Yes, right? That is true. Because if you have a huge civilization, if you have a genetic marker clear across the Pacific Ocean, okay, you have to wonder, this civilization has to have some sort of boating, some sort of marine technology. They were in an advanced stage of development that no archaeologist to this date has been willing to accept. Until now, baby. That's what's on the horizon. That's what's going to happen. And always stay tuned. I highly suggest you guys read PNAS articles, PLOS articles, Nature magazine. Really with this context in mind, okay? Just so you can get the most out of the data that's being found. And with that, we will end and take a break, and we'll come back with listener comments and hopefully some news desk stuff when we return. All right, guys, welcome back to the bottom of the hour. Guys, I got to be honest with you, I got a little bit carried away at the end of the last hour, the last segment. I apologize. I got a little bit crazy, but we're back. Okay, I'm drinking some water now. I've replaced the coffee with water. All right, and then we're going to get into some listener comments. Hopefully I can get through some of these comments and get to my news desk, but I don't know. We'll see what happens, okay? So we're going to go with some listener comments first, just because, you know, I do enjoy engaging, and I think the radio show is a great way to do that. And again, if you guys want to contribute to the conversation, if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, keep to yourself. Even complaints, though, as long as it's not about me. If you have complaints about anything else, please share your thoughts. YouTube.com/thejindo, BitChute.com/thejindo. Leave a comment, or you can get at me on Twitter, Twitter.com/thejindo. Throw your questions out there. And let's see. 21 minutes ago, Gaida Expert says, I'm from Morocco and I'm half Berber, and there are a couple of dialects like Berber that have their own culture, dance, and language. All right, this is in reference to the Green Sahara episode I did I released just earlier today, this morning. I mentioned the Berbers, and the Berbers were highly rumored to have some sort of connection to the people of the Canary Islands, who also have connections to Atlantis. Okay, and if you believe Atlantis existed, and if you believe Atlantid is where the Azores Plateau now, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, then you could see geographically there is some credence there. There is some circumstantial evidence there. So yeah, the Berbers are very interesting people. They were through many generations of persecution. They lived through the Roman Empire 2,000 plus years ago. They lived through persecution of the Muslims. Okay, they lived through all kinds of unspeakable horror. Okay, and yet their culture still stands, and they have a rich history, and I think they definitely have some ties not only to Atlantis but probably the ancient world as well. And I'm very I think the Atlantis story is fascinating. I think it's no coincidence, right, that there is some sort of a story regarding Atlantis in some version or another that exists in pretty much every culture there is. And it's strongly linked to the Great Flood story, which also is ubiquitous in pretty much every single culture on Earth. So I think there is a lot of credence there, and it wouldn't surprise me that Atlantis really started. The problem with talking about Atlantis, though, is that a lot of the evidence is circumstantial, is like Plato's story, and that is apparent in the fact that so many different people have so many different ideas about where Atlantis was. Cuba, the Azores, the Mediterranean, it was at the bottom of the Mediterranean now. The Indian Ocean, Sundaland, right? The ancient city of a land of Mu, right? All of these stories, right, are like people have different ideas. So it's just muddied water, but it's interesting to talk about. It is interesting to talk about, but I try not to mention it too much. But yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for the comment, Guidet Expert, and being half Berber. That's awesome. Let's see. Eric Dondero R. 4 days ago. Okay, this is exceedingly important. What we discussed on your last video in the comment section. I need to draw your attention to precisely the 16-minute mark in this lecture from U of A Professor Michael Hammond. He talks about the AOO haplotype and the discovery from a man in South Carolina. Given what we know as of 3 weeks ago from the study of blah, 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 UCLA, this is simply amazing. Hammond was on to this back in 2013. What are we feels now? UCLA with the AOO haplotype. So Eric is talking about, thank you for the comment, Eric. he is talking about this guy who was found in this old dude. They sequenced his DNA, and they found that he matched this group in Western Africa. Really, and apparently this haplogroup is now called AOO, and they're a very, very ancient haplogroup that goes back into the annals of history. So, again, thank you for the comment. That's really fascinating stuff. I haven't looked at the study yet, but I will add that to the list. Okay. Rowan O'Neill, frequent commenter. If 40,000 to 50,000 years isn't the dreaming, then how fucking old is the dream time? He's talking about the Gundit Mara story, the origin story, the oral history that I mentioned in the previous hour. For instance, in the dream time, birds didn't have colored plumes until an event happened. There was no bird song until a certain event happened. These things have been found in bird DNA. I don't know what he's referring to there. I wish he would elaborate on the bird DNA part. The other is that sea mammals used to live in land as their find limbs are bony and horizontal as opposed to vertical. Okay. Rowan, thank you for the comment. I really don't know what you're talking. Oh, there's more. The intermediate would tell the tale to the kids, and the kids had to pick the wrong storyline, and they would point it out, and the elder would slap the intermediate and tell them to get it right. So the stories were verified through the whole tribe and initiates. This ensured the same telling dance. Okay. He's talking about how they spread the oral history. And I did mention this oral history again. This is 40,000 years of passed on oral history, guys, and it still resonates with the scientific data, the volcanic data today. And I mentioned in that video when I talked about the Gundit Mara people and their origin history that the number one criticism is, oh well, oral history just gets perverted and stuff. That's true when it's written down. That's what Socrates is talking about. Socrates was way against the written word and writing stuff down because it can get perverted and fucked with the later generations. Whereas with oral history, with their customs, the way they did it was so stringent. And I cited the example in Hawaii. The ancient Hawaiians, they had an oral history that was unbroken for a long time. And they had specific people, designated people in the community that their only job was to sing and dance and tell the story accurately in front of the elders and stuff. If you didn't dot your I's and cross your T's, if you weren't like true, if you spoke some untrue shit in the oral history, that's the death penalty. You would get killed on the spot, according to ancient Hawaiian historians. So if that's the case, well, goddamn, that's incentive enough right there to tell the story as close to the original as possible. So again, you find this, it's a very common theme, this type of storytelling within the Pacific Islands, Samoa and Tonga and even New Zealand and Australia. They all had these customs. Again, it's very interesting that these people had these customs and they all share the same genetic heritage and the same cultural heritage and the same origin stories, guys. This is very, very peculiar stuff. And thank you for the comment, Rowan O'Neill. You are the man. Lurkster, 5 days ago. Oral traditions are integral to many cultures in the Pacific. Written words and images can easily be edited or destroyed, but a song or a story that has been handed down from mother to daughter from one generation to the next will still remain the same at the very core: the melody, the lyrics, the actions, the moral and intent. This is the way. Lurkster, you are absolutely right. Thank you for being you're a regular on the channel. Lurkster is awesome. Thank you for your input. And yeah, you're right. The melody, the lyrics, the action, all that had to be on point to keep the integrity of the story and essentially the history of their people alive. That is very paramount, guys. Whenever you read, like when you read the story of Captain James Cook and all these colonizers from the West, the one thing that the people that they were colonizing, they wanted to preserve their history. That was a huge deal to them. It would be considered one of the most shameful things ever if you are the generation that lost your culture's history. If you were that generation, that is a huge, not only is it a sin, that's a huge shame that will follow you into the afterlife. Okay? So these oral traditions are not to be taken lightly. A lot of people are skeptical of oral traditions. They think it's bullshit, but they're thinking through their prism of the Western mind. These people were not Western, guys. We're talking about different people with different upbringing and different origins that run deep. They're so deep that you can't even fathom the impact that it has on their people and how important it is for them to preserve their history, guys. Okay? So, thank you so much, Lurkster. You are the best. Thank you for supporting the show and sticking around and sharing stuff. You are the MVP right now. Okay, Georgia is on my mind. It's farcical to refer to Indian subcontinent as if this was some kind of monolith UN, United Nations. The Indian subcontinent is a farcical term created by British colonists. The oldest civilization in the area is in coterminous Pakistan, and this civilization did not include present-day coterminous India. And then Jay Puig adds to this comment, exactly, really don't understand why people don't get this point. Even if you travel through India today, you can see this. I think he's referring to something I said on the video. I don't know if he's criticizing me if I said Indian subcontinent. I might have said that. Sorry, I guess. I do know that India is very complex, and it's not just one monolithic country with the same people. It's actually a mosaic of a bunch of different people and a rich history. And I was talking about the Tamil Nadu people and their mysterious origins and how they're different from the northern Indians, and then like the border between Pakistan and India, and then the Iranians and the Indo-Aryan invasion. All that stuff I was talking about in the video. So yeah, I do agree. It is farcical to refer not only to the Indian subcontinent as this one blanket statement, but I think it's farcical to say that about anything. Thank you for the comment. Georgia is on my mind in Jay Puig. Let's go down. All right, this one again, Rowan O'Neill. What if at some point smarter humans that understood domestication and subversive techniques to totally change the behavior and mating habits of a large group did exactly that? At some point, humans learnt about totems and selective breeding. Just saying, it had to be perfected somewhere. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely, it had to have been perfected at some point. Domestication must have been understood. Like, domestication itself is just, gosh, like if you look into dogs and when they were domesticated, I mean, the dates are all over the place. Pigs, goats, horses is a big one. Because if you domesticated a horse, you had a leg up on everybody else who didn't master those techniques. And again, this goes back to the Scythians, the people of the steppe. Just this past episode, guys, go to my channel, youtube.com/Jindo, and look at the most recent episode on the Green Sahara people. They had rock art depicting people on horses, okay, circa 12,000 years ago, or 12,000 BC, 14,000 years ago. People on horses came down. I'm assuming from the steppe, because I don't think there were people domesticating horses that originated in the Sahara region, but I could be wrong. But these people came down and taught domestication to the people occupying the rock art. That's so far the conclusion with all the evidence that we have right now. So anyway, thank you for all the comments, guys. There's some stuff on Doggerland and all this stuff. Go to my channel, youtube.com/Jindo, bitshoot.com/Jindo, twitter.com/Jindo if you want to get at me through Twitter. Okay. I did not we have about 8 minutes left in the show. I don't think I will be able to get to my news desk. But I will end on Tartaria. I originally had a plan, guys. This is how much I'm rambling. I had a whole list of stuff that I wanted to get through, but I spent a lot of time on Amazonia, and I didn't get to Tartaria. And this is the most recent rabbit hole that I've been going down. I mean, I'm always concurrently reading stuff throughout the day, or throughout the week rather, and each day I have different things that I'm investigating. But Tartaria, if you guys just look at Tartaria, if you guys can find anything on it, it's really hard to find stuff. But in a nutshell, I will do my best to describe what I've read so far. And I haven't done huge deep dives yet, but I've read enough to where I know that Tartaria was a land, and it was probably the largest contiguous country ever, bigger than the Roman Empire. It started in Tibet, as south as Tibet, the Tibetan Plateau, all the way through the Caucasus Mountains, through Siberia to Alaska and the west coast of the U.S. That's what I read, okay? And as young or as recent as the 17th century is when Peter the Great and the Russian, I guess supposedly the Romanovs came into power. And the Romanovs, they took what's now, they basically are proto-Russia. That what Russia is now is basically what the Romanovs were. They took over from the Rurik dynasty. The Rurik dynasty were people who were Vikings essentially, and then they came to Novgorod, and then they started they started a long for centuries, from like 900 AD all the way to the 1600s, and then it changed power to the Romanovs, and then the Romanovs sought to destroy Tartaria, which they did, and they buried it in the books. If I had a visual, you guys can look at these maps from the 1400s, 1500s. You can see Tartaria on the map, and even if you look at the 1774 dictionary, and you look up Tartaria, it even says in the dictionary that it was the largest country in the world. And then in 1776, which is interestingly enough, the same time when the United States was formed, Tartaria was destroyed, essentially. It was taken over by Russia, and it became known as Russia. And they started renaming towns. They started whitewashing its history. So that is a huge rabbit. I will leave you with that, guys, with Tartaria. Go look into Tartaria, look at the Tatars, look at the mainstream history and compare it to what the alternative history is. I would suggest you guys read I forgot his name. Fedorov? I forget his, god damn it, I wish I would have written it down. But anyway, it's basically history factor fiction. If you guys look up history factor fiction, it details, there's a huge chapter. It's like an encyclopedia almost, and there's there's a whole section on Tartaria and how they all got fucked. And they were essentially the Scythians. Their lifestyle was very similar to the Mongol hordes. And Tartaria came from that same Turkic Mongol Turkic group of pastoralists who, again, were the same as the Scythians. They had the same way of life. This horse-based pastoralism in which they either, when they got their territory, they would either kill you or they'd make you join their way of life. And that's just how it went. And that explains largely why they got so big. Anyway, guys, I'm out of time. So thank you so much for joining me and indulging me in these past 2 hours. Had a great time. Please leave some feedback on either the Grimerica Twitter. Let everybody know how fun this was, because I thought it was fantastic. Thank you for listening. Hey, the listener count went up by 2 or 3 people since I started. Hey, that's awesome. Progress. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me. You guys are the best. I appreciate everything that you guys do. All the feedback, your interest. I think it's fascinating that you guys are into this stuff just as much as I am. I think it's fascinating that you guys respond. And you guys want to carry the conversation. Oh, another thing is, if you guys are in California, Contact in the Desert is going on in Indian Wells, which is near Palm Desert, every year. It's May 31st or May 29th to June 1st this year. So definitely, I will be there. So if you guys want to meet me in person, I will be there. If you guys want to chat it up, I will be making an appearance. I'm also going to be volunteering at the event. So you can maybe catch me at one of the lectures there. But yeah, what else? Is there anything else that I'm missing here? No, I guess that's about it. So anyway, let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you guys later.